Hi and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to continue with part 2 of the Jaja of Opobo story. So keep watching. So where we last left off, Jaja had used the rules of suing for peace in order to evacuate him and his men out of Bonny. In 1870, he established Opobo, which eventually grew to rival even the Bonny Empire. The British consul noticed the success of Opobo and tried to coerce Jaja back into Bonny, all to no avail. And eventually, this led to British firms anchored in Bonny to start losing money. It was estimated up to £100,000, which, adjusting for inflation, now is about £12.2 million, because many of the other British firms had started trading openly with Opobo in defiance of the British consul's orders, and this eventually led to the decline of Bonny's economy. For 18 years, Jaja ruled Opobo well. He had a good relationship with the local palm oil producers, like I said earlier, and the European supercargos, which his relationship with the local palm oil producers were nurtured through like marriage alliances and blood oaths, and he eventually gained a monopoly on palm oil trade with the European supercargos, and he even inflicted severe punishments on any community that tried to go behind his back to trade directly with the Europeans. In 1873, the British recognized Jaja as king of Opobo, and Jaja repaid this by sending his soldiers to aid the British Empire in their war against the then Ashanti kingdom on the Gold Coast, which of course is now known as Ghana. Like the Ashanti kingdom of then is the present day Ghana. He was awarded Jaja was awarded a Sword of Honor in 1875 by Queen Victoria, and for a while everything seemed dandy. It seemed like Jaja and the British Empire had reached an accord and they were working in harmony, but not all was well. The accord between Jaja and Britain did not last. Why? See, Jaja had control of the interior market. He was the middleman between the palm oil producers and the Europeans, and he inflicted custom duties and collected taxes from the Europeans with no exceptions, in order to aid trade between the two of them. He did not allow any direct contact at all between the Europeans and the palm oil traders. But see, the Europeans did not want to pay Jaja a tax or any custom duties in order to get access to the palm oil producers, and Jaja stood in the way of them trading directly, and this eventually led to serious bad blood. In 1884, the British consul Edward Hewitt, fearing German intrusion into the Delta, basically forced protection treaties on all indigenous rulers in that region. Jaja was basically threatened into putting Opobo under British protection. Jaja asked what protectorate meant, and he was assured of his independence. The British consul Edward Hewitt wrote to him saying, "The Queen does not want to take your country or your markets, but at the same time, she is anxious that no other nation should take them. She undertakes to leave your country still under your government. She has no wish to disturb your rule." This letter eventually turned out to be a huge fucking lie, but we'll get there. But Jaja was smart. He insisted on a clause being struck out of the agreement that would allow direct trade of the Europeans with the palm oil traders, and he got his wish. But the very next year, Britain entered into the Berlin Treaty and basically divided the African territories among themselves without heeding the wishes of the Africans themselves, because they owned the land. That's why they had the authority to divide it amongst themselves as the landowners that they were. See, this treaty, like the Treaty of Berlin, gave them the right of free navigation along the major rivers. And the British producers claimed that this gave them the authority to trade directly with the palm oil producers without Jaja as a middleman. And then eventually in 1885, Britain proclaimed the Oil Rivers Protectorate, which included Jaja's territory. Jaja protested it, of course he did, citing their 1884 agreement, but his protest fell on deaf ears because finally, the British people had achieved their aim. They had finally gotten what they wanted all along, which was direct trade with the palm oil producers without Jaja acting as a middleman. In the late 1880s, there was a severe trade depression, and facing severe losses, the British traders came to two decisions. What were these two decisions? One, they decided to lower their prices, and two, they decided to cut out the middleman in order to reduce their cost of production. Of course, this decision did not sit well with Jaja because that removed his main source of income. So Jaja decided to sell his produce and send it directly to Europe. And in retaliation for this, the British consul tried to instruct the European traders not to pay commis to Jaja anymore. Of course, Jaja sent a delegation to Britain to protest both the consul and the traders' decision, but again, his protest fell on deaf ears. Eventually, under threat of naval bombardment, Jaja was forced to sign an agreement that allowed free trade between the Europeans and the palm oil producers. Now, at this point, Jaja had realized finally that the British wouldn't keep to their word, and they basically were just going to take whatever they wanted, no matter the agreements in place. So he started working on transferring his power from Opobo back to Igbo land, his birthplace. Like he was working on transferring his the members of his house, his people from Opobo to Imo. But in the end, it turned out to be too late for him to escape. Then a man called Harry Johnston, the then vice consul, was very anxious for his colonial career to take off. So he lured Jaja onto his boat with a promise of safety and that he could leave at any time he wanted, and that he simply wanted to discuss ways of easing the tension between Jaja and the British government and traders. See, Jaja was initially very suspicious, but Johnston wrote to him telling him that, "I hereby assure you that whether you accept or reject my proposals tomorrow, no restriction will be put on you. You will be free to go as soon as you have heard my message." Honestly, Jaja should have stuck to his guns and followed his instincts, because that turned out to be a lie. The assurance turned out to be a lie. As soon as Jaja boarded his warship Goshawk, Johnston kidnapped Jaja, took him to the Golden Coast then, conducted a sham trial, and found him guilty of actions inimical to the interests of the British Empire. Still, that wasn't enough for Johnston. He was still scared of Jaja's influence even in the Gold Coast, so he had him deported even further to the West Indies at St. Vincent Island. Contrary to Johnston's expectations, his duplicity had far-reaching consequences than even he could imagine. What he had done, or what he did, basically destroyed any trust the indigenous population had in the British government and in the British traders, and trade between them eventually ground to a halt, because they felt like if they could do this to Jaja, such a powerful man, what could they not do to them if things did not go their way? In fact, what was stopping them from just entering their farms and taking what they wanted? Which they eventually did, but Jaja made repeated appeals to Britain to be released and returned back to Opobo, and eventually in 1891 he was released, but unfortunately he died en route back to Opobo. But his people did not mind. They paid for the cost of transporting his body back to the island, and even held a huge royal funeral for him. the likes of which had never been seen before. The thing is, there's a conspiracy theory among Nigerians, of which personally I do believe this because I don't put it past the British, that Jaja's death on his way back was not accidental, that the British feared his power too much, so they decided to get rid of him so that he would not grow back into power. And honestly, I feel like that's not far-fetched. I feel like it's something that is very possible. Well, what do you guys think? So that's the end of the Jaja of Opobo story. His story is inspirational because he's basically the embodiment of the rags to riches story, from being a slave to a huge wealthy merchant. But it's just so sad that the story ended up being such a tragedy. But the thing is, in those days, most of those stories ended up being tragedies the British because the colonial masters, they did not feel comfortable letting the people they were trying to enslave basically have powerful leaders. So don't forget to like, subscribe, and of course comment your thoughts on the video, whether you believe my conspiracy theory or if you feel like I'm being too paranoid. Bye.